is Will Halim. I'm sure you know already. But here I have Josh Lucas with me, first guest of Storyburgh podcast. We call it the Convos for the conversations.
Yeah.
And so the setting is like we talk about things, but why I have you here is kind of full circle. You know, when I first started doing this Storyburgh was in the launch hilltop at Work Hard Pittsburgh in late 2015.
Wow.
Right?
Pre-Trump.
And you...
The golden years.
Pre-COVID?
Pre-COVID,
Pre-Trump. Yeah. My goodness, like a decade ago.
Yeah.
Pretty much, right?
Pretty much, yeah.
Yeah. So I really appreciate having you here. So it's like the next chapter, right?
Yeah, for sure.
With the same guy, right?
Yeah, I don't think I did something with Dustin Downing maybe a year ago now. I haven't done any other podcasts or anything with any regularity in a long time. So
yeah,
it's nice to be back and having a conversation with people.
Yeah, and then I remember during that time, I tried to get myself involved in the, I don't know what it's called. I mean the tech scene or whatever, right? So I attended an event. I think Kaylee Strayhorn and East End, and then I think it was Kit Miller, right? The guy,
probably
right?
Kit, sounds right.
And then I remember when you mentioned that we have Josh Lucas in, we have Josh Lucas in here, and he's like, oh, he's a celebrity.
Oh, I don't know if I was ever a celebrity. It was a long time ago, and I don't know that I took advantage of that 15 minutes of fame for. I certainly didn't. Walk away driving a Ferrari with my celebritydom, my Pittsburgh celebritydom.
Right. But but people know you. So why?
Nice.
Or
That's
what
nice
happened?
Feeling.
So I mean, why? So what happened? Why people knew you?
Why do people know me or knew me? I guess I don't know if they know me anymore. It's been 2 years of hiatus, I think. Yeah, I mean, I think it all started. I think the first place it started was when I left my teaching job to start working in tech. So, that was my introduction, I think, to the Pittsburgh market in a meaningful way, because when you start making a product, you got to sell that product. So you kind of got to get out there and shake the tree and meet people and shake hands and all that and that sort of stuff. But that tech stuff, I think I quickly realized wasn't really where my ethical perspective was, or my moral compass kind of resided, and that drug me into more economic development based work, which is Work Hard Pittsburgh, where we met Will, and Academy Pittsburgh, and sort of a bunch of peripheral projects that were all intended to be in some way or another opportunity creating engines for people in the city.
Right.
And I think that work, I think most people would say who were involved in that work, that it was pretty successful in that it did what it intended to do. It gave people a chance to make some money, gave people a chance to have a community around sort of progressive values.
Yeah.
And how that aligns with making money.
Yeah.
Because oftentimes, at least culturally, the culture of making money is not the progressive culture in our country.
Right.
So that was really,
or it seems.
Right.
At least on the surface, right?
Yeah, at least superficially, progressives don't win awards for their economic ideas or policies typically.
Right.
And aren't usually the folks that, even when they say they're progressives, aren't usually the folks that are accumulating massive amounts of wealth. I mean, you see that with goofy Elon Musk, right? Like, who would claim to be have progressive values, at least at some point in his history, and he's obviously not that at all, or if he ever was, right?
Right.
So, I mean, I think that's why people know me, right? I think people know me because the work that I did for a decade was trying to align progressive values with economic opportunity. And that in and of itself has some inherent cognitive dissonance. And that set me apart and made me, for a short, brief period of time, perhaps a little Pittsburgh famous.
Yeah. So, didn't you win something? I mean,
win something,
or like a I don't know, like a startup boot camp or with a person named Morrison. Is it?
Don Morrison?
Yes.
Yeah, Don Morrison at that time was part of Blue Tree, Allied Angel Investors, right?
Right.
But no, we never. The startup side of what I did, which was a crowdfunding website for political speech, just way back in like 2011, largely went unnoticed by the Pittsburgh market.
Okay.
We did Alpha Lab, and that was fine. I learned a lot, but ultimately, like it fizzled out pretty rapidly. Because it never got any meaningful investment, which probably, is the theme that we'll come back to over and over again in this conversation. It's like, what is meaningful investment? And like, how do we measure that? And like, who should be getting it? And that sort of thing. That's really my, why I'm here to pound my fist on the table, Will, is to talk about like the perception of what meaningful investment is here in town and what in economic reality would be a meaningful investment for a project.
Right. Basically, economic reality for the powers that be.
Yeah.
Right. Those who have, expendable.
Those with the resources.
Exactly.
May not share the opinion of the people soliciting resources as to what is a meaningful investment.
Right. So meaningful. I mean, I have. Storyburgh has this, I don't want to say platform, but we have an event, we call it the DMZ, the Demilitarized Zone. And I had a chance to speak, to tell my stories, personal stories. I promised to deliver 3, so I have done 2. And in the second one, I spoke about the importance of definition, right? So when people say meaningful, when people say ethical, like, okay, what those 2 mean to you, right?
Yeah.
Like when you say like a meaningful, right? Meaningful for me, it's different from meaningful for you, and it's different from those who have powers to give money or investment, right? So they have different, definition of meaningful. And sometimes, like you said, I think you mentioned a word, perceive, that perceive is not necessarily the reality that they actually have, right? So sometimes, my Storyburgh has been around, like, we met during the Launch Hilltop in 2015. Just like you mentioned, the progressive value that, we thought that everything is, if it's good for the communities, it should be a go, right?
Right.
But not necessarily. So we find it that, there are other factors too that makes things a hit or makes things attractive, because again, right, attractive to me is not attractive to other people.
Yeah, and in my later era of Work Hard Pittsburgh and Academy Pittsburgh and everything, that was a pet peeve of mine, right? Like, from my perspective, it doesn't have to be such an arbitrary definition. It's very often comes down to measuring outcomes quantitatively rather than qualitatively.
Right.
And then having the courage to take those quantitative measurements of success and pick winners.
Right.
And that's what we're still, I don't know if we're still that. That's what my perception of reality is that, like, historically in town, everybody talks about measuring outcomes. Oftentimes you might have to even write that down in an end of year report on a grant cycle.
Right.
What happens to that data and how it's scrutinized in a authentic or honest way? There's a political aspect to that maybe that's just the human condition. Maybe there always has to be a political aspect to that. Maybe
unfortunately,
my dream of quantitative successes that then get rewarded for their success, maybe that's just a pipe dream.
Yeah. So the answer is talking about Work Hard. Let me show this. There's still a website.
Oh yeah, there's still a website.
Yeah, I'm showing it on the screen right now, so people who are just listening, you can just type up URL, workhardpgh.com. It's still online. Still has great pictures, great informations, and honestly, you guys just inspired the heck out of me.
Well, thanks.
You having the resources, you gather resources from many communities, right? So I look at it as a supply chain of knowledge, supply chain of deliverables. So you have people with different knowledge, different skills, and we also have different customers with different needs.
Yeah.
And now startup a business is really hard, right? So maintaining it, it start probably you can say it's easy, but to keep alive,
Yeah.
successfully, not just, you know,
Yeah.
it's harder. And I think that was great, right? Work and especially, but remember that one of the things that you offer is like people can share equipment, for example, which is really expensive. So in addition to skills, you also share equipment. I had, initially, because I had a lot of past lives. So before Storyburgh, I was
Yeah.
photographer, and equipment is expensive,
For sure.
right? And I know my dream for when I saw this, like, oh yeah, I wish that I could have an organization where people can share equipment, people can share things. And I know at that time we still had the Pittsburgh filmmakers who actually did that.
Yeah.
But where's Pittsburgh filmmakers now?
Where are any of these sort of community projects now? Yeah, I mean, so Work Hard Pittsburgh was a lot of things to a lot of people. And that's probably, a good indication of its success. At its core, what it tried to do was create an economic structure for people to participate in entrepreneurship and the creative arts, for lack of a better word, right? So
Right.
At its peak, there were probably 60 or 70 active measures, all working in a framework of governance that resulted in some amount of democratic decision making. Now, depending on which member you ask about that, there'll be varying opinions about the successfulness of that democratic governance.
Right.
And I'll be the first to admit that it never fully matured. It never was able to sort of remove its own internal hierarchy, which I was largely in charge of, so that we could really test this idea of an ecosystem that could generate economic wealth and democratically govern itself.
Right.
That was ultimately the goal, right? The idea was that we could collectively do just as good as innovation works,
Right.
in taking products to market, but rather than consolidate that wealth under some sort of venture capital or already rich guy model, we could then have those successes either fuel additional products or do distributions to the membership to create wealth for their families. And in that very sort of noble mission was probably way too many tangential efforts, too many other things going on that muddied the message, confused sort of the participants, allowed too much democratic freedom's probably the wrong word, but drift. And so as years went on and on and on, it never got lean. It didn't ever get leaner and leaner and more effective. It sort of just got muddier and muddier and muddier. And then kind of COVID sweeps in, and that fragments what was, and again, this is all just my perspective. Other people are going to have very different perspectives on this, I suspect. But
Yeah.
COVID took what was a boots on the ground community that relied on interpersonal relationships to understand the mission and the work, and stop that for 18 months. It just basically interrupted our normal habits of work and traditions and cultural norms, and we never really recovered from that. And we never really recovered as a community because this sort of end of the pandemic was also syncopated with the end of sort of our philanthropic support, which had been pretty consistent for 6 or 7 years. One of the large foundations in town each year would step up to subsidize essentially this work. And I think that's that's those things combined are what marked the end of that
Right.
project in that era.
Okay. You touch base on a lot of other, not other, but a lot of points
Yeah, I do.
that
well.
that you could certainly go in depth on those stuff. But so let's start with the last statement that you said about the foundations actually step in. So why did they stop?
Oh, I have no idea. I mean, if you look at it quantitatively, like that project and its spin-offs like Academy Pittsburgh and the creative agency, which we called WH Digital, had amazing outcomes. Half of the folks, at least half, usually more like 65% of the folks that were participating were from some underrepresented group in the tech economy. People were leaving Academy Pittsburgh and being placed in the jobs at like an 83% placement rate. The agency side was doing about $1.5 million of business every year. About 80% of that revenue went directly to the folks that were actually doing the work as 1099 laborers. At its peak, we were pushing millions of dollars of years of wages into the Pittsburgh market in an equitable and really kind of meaningful way. So it's a bit of a head scratcher as to why it never sort of received more than, from my perspective again, like the basic annual investment it needed to keep the lights on. And that is probably honestly, Will, if I had to like pick one or two things that is most frustrating about this grand experiment, is that lack of feedback. The philanthropic community over roughly 10 years, maybe 9, invested about $2.2 or $3 million into our project. And at no time in that were we ever given feedback. No time in that were we ever even sort of vetted or checked that the work we were doing was good or bad or authentic or being reported accurately.
Right.
Nobody ever.
Some organizations love those. I mean, love the fact that they're not being checked. Right?
Yeah, I think it's. I mean, again, I like to measure things, right? So,
right.
So that's frustrating in that, like, here you have a seed or here you have a project that is producing what it intends to produce. Everybody in the region is saying that workforce development for folks that are locked outside of tech because of their race or their sexual identity or their gender is super important to making Pittsburgh livable and an amazing city where people were going to want to come to.
Right.
And at no point does anybody of authority sit down and say, this is good, this is bad, this could use improvement. Why don't you take it this direction? If you take it this direction, then we can do X or we can do Y. At no point did that ever happen. And so we're always just sort of like, as a community, trying to read the minds of the folks with the resources and deliver what we think they want. And ultimately, they're fickle. So when they stop wanting what you're giving them, then the investment goes away.
I mean, it's no longer sexy, probably.
It's no longer sexy. Right, exactly.
Okay, so you touched another point that about accountability, right? I mean, like I interjected earlier, some organization would love it, right?
Yeah.
It's like, oh, just give me money, free money, and don't talk to me ever again, right? But some people would like to have not just ideas, but continuous improvement to actually make it better. That is good for everyone, right? So I'm sure that you get feedback from your customers, get feedback from the people that you help, right? So, but for the work that we do, Work Hard Pittsburgh and Storyburgh, that it's like a public goods. We like to see it that way, right? But it's hard when people don't share what they think, how we're doing, and what they think how we should be doing in the future, right? So what makes you, it's like hey, you're doing great or you're doing not great, and this is how to make you better, or this is how we can see you in 5 years, in 10 years, right? Or probably there is I'm not sure whether it's applicable to Work Hard Pittsburgh, but I think for media, I mean, foundations could not support media newsroom more than 5 years, or they have to label that organization as pretty much just foundation owned, right? So it has to be. I know there's a lot of media newsroom here. They're looking in the nonprofits ones. They're looking for membership base. They're looking for some other source of revenue, because if the majority of revenue is coming from foundation for a certain number of years, at the
well, I mean, isn't that public source already?
Probably.
Yeah.
right? So that could be the challenge.
And isn't that Next Pittsburgh to some degree? Isn't Next Pittsburgh largely philanthropic funded? I could be wrong. I don't know.
Probably. I saw, I have to check with my neighbor right here next to Pittsburgh. Well,
but this is the issue, right? So. Like, there are tax rules that govern the way that philanthropy distributes money, right?
Right.
I get that. Everything we did was a for-profit, and that creates a layer of consequence for philanthropy because they are essentially making investments in a for-profit, and that triggers tax code or creates situations in the tax code that could imperil their foundation status. Mm-hmm. So again, all of that is fair and a reasonable thing for an investor, like community investor, like the foundations in town to say. But to your point, why not explicitly tell the partner what it is that you hope to accomplish, and then say, if you hit these metrics, and we are going to do these other things to support your work because we think that scaling this kind of work has economic value or has community value or has culture value or whatever it be. So it's just it's just to reiterate like what I've previously said, like the lack of input that is given as feedback to people that are receiving hundreds of millions of dollars regionally, right, it indicates to me that this act of philanthropy is as much political as it is purposeful. And I don't think that's the best way. I don't think that's ideally how it should be. And I get it's private money, it's family money, it's foundation money. There's a board of control that sort of, in my perception, sways what projects get invested in and what projects don't get invested in. But ultimately, if this is about the mission of public good and making Pittsburgh livable and improving the economic fortunes of the people that live in the city, the more political it is, probably the less effective it is. If you're not measuring it and rewarding success, then I don't know that you're doing the best, most good you could be doing.
Right.
And it's boring to me.
Yeah, I completely agree with you. Yeah, completely agree with you.
Yeah.
And I think the lack of transparency.
Oh, shocking.
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 This is completely all the way from the top.
Somebody should cancel the foundations with their lack of transparency. Right? Can you imagine if like there was that lack of transparency? Pick anything in town that is big and influential. If like they had that same lack of transparency and unaccountability, nobody can criticize them. No critic, right? Like nobody can like give the counter argument to the perspective of what's being delivered because there's no one to challenge that wealth. There's no one to challenge that mission.
And being, one of the top employers in the city.
Yeah.
And that's scary, right?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Let me just restate that more clearly. Because look at like UPMC, right? Like it has a gaggle of critics, right? Everybody scrutinizes UPMC and says all sorts of mean things about it, right? And that's good. That's giving balance to UPMC and pressure that keeps them to whatever degree, we can argue about the degree of this, authentically trying to do a good thing for the region. Without that scrutiny, without that sort of counterbalance of chatter,
right.
Like what would UPMC be doing, right? Without a union to counterbalance UPMC's bad worker policies, without the political elite here in town criticizing UPMC for being the biggest landholder and nonprofit in the city and not paying taxes. Like what sort of craziness would UPMC be doing if they didn't have that sense of accountability or that pressure to like keep them honest? Philanthropy has none of that. Nobody can criticize philanthropy because the people that are equipped to criticize philanthropy are the recipients of the money. Right? No media organization in town can effectively criticize philanthropy because in some way or another, they're benefiting from that philanthropy. And that's a real kind of crisis in philanthropy that I don't think anybody talks about. I doubt that
because they don't want to talk or they're afraid to talk about it.
No, they can't talk about that. No.
Okay, welcome to Storyburgh. We talk about everything.
Sorry. All right, I'll stop.
No, continue, please. Yeah. I completely agree with you.
Yeah.
And I think not just philanthropy, but also local government.
Yeah.
right? And I remember when the previous mayor was in charge, and actually he he and his one of his commission mentioned about how bad the city. Okay, this is the complete not complete report, but this is the report, right? So you could Google it, right? That that you could place an African American woman anywhere in the city, anywhere in the United States, they would be better off than living in Pittsburgh.
That's crazy.
That's crazy. And I
Yeah.
was, I was impressed that when during that announcement that the mayor was there, because he commissioned that report. But then, crickets,
Yeah.
right? So, I could not imagine, I came from a for-profit background. I worked for 10 years and I somehow work in the management. And, for things like that, we would just go into a war room and we would just break it up.
Right.
We would not leave until all stones are turned.
Yeah.
Every single from the hard to get, it's like hard to solve to easy to solve, So we just turn everything in from, Roman numeral 1 to whatever into a dot IV, all, basically it's a categorization, like so as detailed as possible until we know exactly what they are and and then the next day or whatever, then we do we're going to do about it. And then we keep track of it, the progress, right?
Right.
It's not happening over here, right? And people say, yeah, it's bad for, for African American women to live in Pittsburgh. And then they have some proposals to do, or not just proposals, they had things that they measured quantitatively with the help of researchers from University of Pittsburgh. And those are just a great start.
Yeah.
Put them all up, I wish they had a dashboard, right? Open, transparent.
Yeah.
These are the problems we're facing.
Yeah.
It's important. It's a priority numero uno.
Yep.
And we're going to do it. And we're going to get back to you 3 months from now.
Yep.
It could just be a progress of 1%. It could probably
Support
just
the
go
progress.
back to
It could be negative
five.
progress.
Exactly.
At least we know then, right?
Exactly. And these are the people in charge, and these are the things that they have been doing. Whatever, right?
Yeah.
We would like to see report. It's not just crickets.
Yeah. I mean, if you're in an organization, you ask yourself, who is my critic? And the answer is nobody, right? Like that should indicate to you that you're not operating in a proper way.
Right.
If you are uncriticizable, if you have no feedback from the community in a way that is public and meaningful or hurtful even, right? Like you should be looking for that like hurtful feedback and measuring then your response to it, to your point. Like you would go into the room and say, what are we doing? We spent $400 million, and like, well, what did we do?
Right.
It's crazy to me. It's crazy to me.
Yeah. And then I'm sure they're going to come up with another report several years after and say, okay, we're still bad, right? But no, they're not going to say they're still bad.
What they'll do, Will, is they'll bring in an outside organization from out of town to generate that report.
Right.
And pay them $500,000 to do it.
Right. And they will act surprised.
Yeah, right. Yeah. And they'll act surprised when that external outside organization either closes up shop, disappears, doesn't come back for year 3. Yeah. Sorry.
Right. And
do I have to say sorry every time I say something mean about philanthropy?
I know, right? And I always have to say right all the time.
I mean, this podcast is called Burning Bridges, right? So like.
Well, no.
Oh, it's not? Oh, I thought that's what we were going with.
But that's what we're doing. We call it the convos, okay? We call it the conversations. But the conversation for this one, I mean, lessons learned. I was in charge in the corporate to do lessons learned.
What was your corporate? Where were you?
It was applied materials.
Oh, okay.
Do you know what that is?
It's like novel material science stuff, right?
No, it's not.
See,
right, so because we make robots and all the processes so companies could make chips.
Oh, okay.
So every single electronic that we have, for sure, a single component or most of them have to pass through applied materials tools to make it.
Yeah.
So we have robots do make. What is the nano chips right now. I think it's almost single digit, right? Nano in the measurement, and it had to go through applied materials tool. So we had to create robots that could make that chips,
Yeah.
right? Certainly, it's not a retail product. That's why consumers do not know, like, with applied material, what the heck is that? But we provide all our equipment, so Intel could make their chips, so Nvidia could make their great chips, right? And AMD, Motorola,
And
Apple.
what was your role there?
My last role over there was operations manager, and things that I was in charge is process improvement, how to make things better, more effective and efficient.
Yeah.
So I always like to see flowchart.
Yeah.
You know, when it happens,
Yeah.
who makes the call, or whatever, the who, what, when, where, how, right? So this is like journalism here, right? So so identify those, and then what are the deliverables? What are the outcomes that we want to find, right? So I remember one of the problems that I helped solve was that the tool that we built took 9 months.
Yeah.
From somebody makes an order, somebody delivers it, in the fab that for the factory, and there are things change along the line, right? And when you make a change too late, then it's hard. It's hard to to make it happen. So you really have to understand when the change can be made, how late could it be, and then who's gonna pay the cost, pretty much.
Like the downstream costs.
The downstream costs, right? Yeah. And I know that there was a problem. The customer always, we want it now, right? And the designer said, it was just a concept. And the sales guy, we got to check.
We sold 100. Yeah.
And by the way, if you're late, you're going to get penalty, right? Yeah. So of course the manufacturing, they just went crazy. The designers, the engineers are like, what the heck? Right?
And these are big, tens of millions of dollar contracts, probably, like huge, huge money. Yeah.
And and then I remember one of the project was that a change could trigger 3 months, thing, and then we have to change it. But then it's I quoted my boss, it's not acceptable. I was like, why is it not acceptable? It's just physics. I mean, it's
that's right. Like,
and then it's like, okay, Will, make it 3 weeks, make it 1 week. I'm like, how?
Oh
wow, can't. Right? It's like, try it anyways. I mean, so we gather people from manufacturing, from designers, from the business management.
Sure.
So what do we need to make it happen? Of course, certainly, if it's not designed yet, we could not deliver.
Yeah.
Right? But then, okay, let's not think negative. Let's think that, okay, to deliver it, what were the timelines? We need to get it here, we need to get it here, we need to get it here. We just lay it out, right? So you just make it transparent. So, and then give that cheat sheet to the sales, give that cheat sheet to the business management. Hey, when you make a commit to a customer, think about this, right? And then certainly there are things that we can actually change if it's a small thing, like it's not like a big manifold of aluminum or stainless steel that we have to make. Something is small. Okay, so for those kind of stuff, we could actually cut it in the manufacturing, but it's going to disrupt a lot of stuff, especially when the designer said, this is a must, otherwise those things are not going to work.
Yeah, that level of process experience, right? That's what's sorely lacking in philanthropy, right?
Right. So
if you've never seen like a process expanded like that or scrutinized like that to maximize something, and you don't understand that it's even possible.
It's impossible. Yeah. And one of the tool that we had is so complex that the number of piece parts we have to deal with, can be matched with the building of 747. We almost have like a 10,000 piece parts. So one of the, a lot of those piece parts, can be changed.
Sure.
Right. And if the change is way inside the tool, it's impossible. It's almost, I mean, of course, the sales would not want to hear that. Nothing is impossible. You can do it,
it's
right?
just expensive. Maybe is the way to put it.
It's just expensive, right?
Yeah.
So, and then so we have to design the process, like how can it happen?
Yeah.
And then luckily that I could come back to my boss, like, okay, we could make it to 3 weeks.
Yeah.
From a 3 months change to 3 weeks, but these are the things that have to happen, and and it's a non-standard. It should not be a should not be a common thing. We can
Yeah.
only do, I forgot the number, probably just like we could only do these things 3 in a month or 3 something. So
Sure,
there's a
sure.
measurement. So we cannot do that because this is like a labor intensive.
Yeah.
Somebody-
Resource depleting.
Right. Somebody actually have to carry that from one station to another station to another station. He's in charge.
Yeah.
And it's very expensive, right?
Yeah. How many years did you do that? Or how many years were you in the private sector, I guess, maybe is a better
10
question?
years.
10 years.
10 years.
And then like what was the impetus that drove you to Storyburgh and sort of this sort of public good face of
So
what you're doing?
it's voluntary and involuntary too, I guess, like a combination of both, right? So my, so Applied Materials is a hardware company, obviously, and my spouse is in the software company,
Uh-huh.
right? So she felt that my wife was not satisfied with her software job, and then she quit.
Mhm.
And then she wanted to find some other more meaningful, a word that we already mentioned, kind of job. So she quit, and eventually she attended a graduate program.
Mhm.
And so we live in San Jose in North California, and the graduate program was in the Southern California.
Mhm.
So, and then I asked my boss, like, hey,
Mhm.
my wife got the graduate program, a prestigious program in Southern California. So can I telecommute? I can come into the office 3 times per week,
Mhm.
which is really doable during this COVID years, right?
Yeah. Yeah. The 405 was.
But this was like, I don't know, 2 decades ago or something, right?
Uh-huh.
And my boss said, okay. His boss said, no.
That's a big commute though, right?
Yeah. But we have Southwest Airlines over there.
So you would have just took a shuttle.
It's a
yeah,
LA to Bay Area. I think they fly 5-6 times
a day,
a
probably.
day,
yeah.
right?
Crazy,
So
yeah.
it's not that bad, but it's like
So you gave it all up. You gave up the economic comfort of your
Yes.
deeply troubling
Yes.
private sector job.
Yes. And then so that for profit in LA, and LA is famous for what? Entertainment, right?
Yeah.
Famous for all those glitzy stuff, right? So and then I learned photography,
Uh-huh.
right? We had a small child at that time, right? So it's like, okay, you do your thing, graduate program, must be busy, time consuming or whatever. I took care of the child,
Mhm.
right? So I became a stay-at-home dad, right? And then so during my off time, because I think my child was 3.5 years old, so basically there's no school. I mean, only probably
Yeah.
several hours or whatever, right? So during my free time, I learned photography.
Yeah.
I got first I got interested into street photography, but then I went to learn other kinds of photography that LA was famous for,
Mhm. Mhm.
right? So, but then 5 years, I think 5 years or 6 years in LA area, and then we moved here because my wife got a job at University of Pittsburgh.
Mm.
Okay. So there's no entertainment here in Storyburgh.
No, I don't believe
There's
that.
no-
Pittsburgh's the most livable city. I see that over and over again. We have all the amenities, Will. All of them. And COVID didn't affect any of them.
There's no fashion. There's
What? Have you not seen the Penguins jerseys this year?
No...
There's fashion, Will. You take that back. You're not
I'm
gonna
sorry.
be on any lists.
Yeah, I'm
if
gonna
you keep
get
talking
canceled
like
for
this.
saying this. I'm pretty sure.
Yeah.
All right. So and then I got my I took some other shots. Not those glitzy entertainment. I got some of my pictures shown in not in Carnegie Museum. I got pictures along those walls. Some in the Youngstown Museum, Butler. I forgot what it's called.
Yeah.
Sorry. And then was also one or a couple shown at the Westmoreland Museum of Modern Arts.
So you've been here for like a decade then? How long have
Yes,
you in
since
Pittsburgh?
2010.
It's 2010.
Right. Yeah. So I mean, just taking pictures was not quite meaningful to me. So I guess
Sure.
that's a word that we've been saying for quite some times. So I got into so words. Also, pictures alone are not enough. People may say pictures.
Yeah, not anymore.
Pictures speak 1,000 words. Not really. I mean, you know.
Yeah. In
Right?
2010, it was way different. The value of a photograph versus today.
Right. So it's still, even the picture, you still have captions. You know, sometimes when you have captions, you have more things, information you have to go
Yeah.
through, right? You have to deliver. So I like to, so that's why I got this Storyburgh.
Oh, okay, cool.
It's a long story.
It is a great. Listen, everybody's got a long story. That's the point of living, right? Is to
Right. And also
accumulate that long story.
Also the point of this podcast, the Convos. I mean, Storybook started with just like short story, you know, it's like 1,500 words or less, right?
Yeah.
That's our aim. You know, sometimes it's not enough, and sometimes like this back and forth in some of this new information that the interviewee provides and said, hey, yeah, that's a great point. Let's talk more about that. Something that probably we cannot do it in written form, at least in the 1,500 form.
Well, and listen, I'm a big believer that we need to actively work to preserve human experience, because I think that as general AI approaches and as we like sub out all of our human tasks to machines,
Yeah.
you know, this conversation, this is the only thing that is not going to be replicable over time from some sort of artificial intelligence.
Right.
And so it's important that we have more conversations and are more vocal about what's changing in our economies and our cultures than we ever have been before, because that 1,500 word essay is quickly becoming not written by a human, right?
Right.
And it is going to overwhelm society in a way that we haven't thought through in a very smart way.
Right. So yeah, talking about the AI, you know, they may get all this news that they learn from the published news, right? But you know, we see that not many people would be comfortable in sharing their experiences, right?
Yeah.
And that's why Storyburgh's mission is to get those stories, to encourage people to speak their minds and give platforms that are safe for them to talk about it.
Yeah,
right?
it's meaningful to capture that.
Right.
It's a unique time in history.
Right. And you live in Allentown, or you live?
I don't. No, I've never lived in Allentown. I've always lived in a hilltop neighborhood.
Mm-hmm.
So I've lived in 4 or 5 hilltop neighborhoods since I moved here in the 90s. So I live in the last neighborhood in Mount Washington. It's called Duquesne Heights, like right before you go down into the West End.
Okay. So which one is it? Duquesne Heights, right there.
Yeah.
Okay. All right.
Like right there.
Okay. Okay. So, you know, I guess in my 1/3 I put Allentown, so I had to correct that. Or well, it's already recorded, so I apologize.
That's okay. Yeah, I've never.
That's where we met, in Allentown. There you go.
I mean, I worked in Allentown for a decade for sure, but I've never lived there.
Right. So, if you remember talking about this your neighborhood in Duquesne Heights is different. So.
Yeah, but you're different.
Are you comfortable in talking about Allentown?
Yeah, totally.
Okay.
I mean, I know Allentown intimately, right? I know everything about Allentown. I think at this point, I sat on the community board, the Allentown Community Development Corporation. I've been on the board of the Hilltop Alliance. You know, I've done my community service there.
Okay.
Largely.
So I remember that in 2016, I think we had this event organized by NSR. Yeah, I got the pictures of that, like a community input.
Oh yeah. That was the first Academy Pittsburgh location.
Yeah, we have a cultural something.
Cultural gumbo, maybe.
No, that's an event for party, right? So so I think NSR invited the community members to talk about what they want the community should be.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah. I remember.
About that, right?
I do remember this. Yes.
Okay. So what happened?
Oh, I don't know.
Is this one of the example that?
I mean, New Sun Rising is better than most at activating and acting on, you know, what they do and what they seek out as information.
Right. I agree.
I've never been a staff person or you know, involved in New Sun Rising's governance, but I'm sure that New Sun Rising at least published what the community members said about Allentown and what they wanted for Allentown. And I have some vague memory of that, but that's so long ago. Well, I can't remember like the details of like what the findings were, right? I could go out on a limb and make an educated guess, right? Like people in Allentown want the same thing anybody wants in their neighborhood, right? They want economic opportunity and they want the amenities that make their life easier. So for the longest time, one of the most requested items in those hilltop neighborhoods has been a grocery store because
Right.
there's so much food insecurity. So I'm
Right, which is a lot of neighborhoods.
which is any
Yeah.
poor neighborhood, right? Like if you have to take 2 buses to get to a grocery store, it just eats away your time and your energy. But the math of that it's hard to make work. Just the population density up there, and this is a Pittsburgh problem for sure. Like our propensity to be on lists for livability masks the fact that our population is at best stagnant and still may be declining depending on who you ask and like what you're looking at. And so if you don't have population density, you can't have nice things, and to some degree, because the economics of it, the math of it just doesn't work. Giant Eagle can't put a grocery store on the hilltop and hope that it's going to be successful. It just can't make the ends meet.
Not just population density, but population density who has
Disposable income,
money
to
buy those stuff, right?
Yeah. So I think, most people who participated in that group in 2015, you said? Was that
2016?
2016, are probably disappointed in the progress made in that neighborhood.
Yeah.
And while I think the neighborhood is stabilized and does have some things, like it has Leon's Caribbean, which I think is...
Oh, yeah. I just visited, I think, several weeks ago. And what's great?
Yeah, Black owned.
Improvement on the space.
And I think a decade ago, that would have been hard to see successful up there.
Right.
Leon is an older gentleman, African American. He got a lot of support from the Hilltop Alliance and the Allentown Community Development Corporation. And back when we were up there, he had some built-in foot traffic too, which I think was a little bit helpful in the early years. Mm-hmm. But like a decade before that kind of stuff wasn't there. There wasn't the established foot traffic. There wasn't sort of like other things to do up there that might give a small local entrepreneur who had a food truck an opportunity to have that physical location.
Yeah.
Yeah. So there are some things still there, and I think stuff comes and goes. Obviously, RA360 is still a big part of what happens in that commercial district. I don't know what percentage of the commercial buildings they own up there, but it's substantial, right? And Joe Calloway, the owner, gets a lot of heat, a lot of criticism, which is good. He should have critics, right? That's important that a large commercial real estate development corporation gets feedback.
Anybody should have critics.
Everybody should have. And if you don't have a critic, the lesson here is that maybe that's scary. You should look inward. Joe, I think he tries to obviously first make money because he is a business and he has investors. But on the backside of that, he, at least in my experience, has been willing to have conversations about like what people want up there, and has, out of pocket put money into projects that, depending on who you ask, better the community. Now, Joe obviously has a perspective as a 45-year-old white dude. Like what Joe thinks is cool isn't going to necessarily translate to what the Black community up there thinks is cool, or the Latino community up there thinks is cool. But, there's all these different opposing forces, and I don't know, man. It's tough nut to crack.
Right. And I think a lot of neighborhoods, we're supposedly to have 90 neighborhoods, right, in Pittsburgh,
Mm-hmm.
right? So I think most of those neighborhoods have the same problem.
Oh, yeah, for sure.
Right. So
consolidated land holdings, right? Like commercial entities holding the high value property, right? Lack of population density, lack of connectivity. It's the story of a Rust Belt city.
Right. Yeah. So, what do you think I don't want to use the word solve, but how do you?
Oh, I got answers for you, Will.
Oh, wonderful!
I got answers for you, buddy.
Spill them.
Yeah, it's what we were pitching, right? Like we need economic mechanisms that disperse ownership and disperse wealth consolidation. The opposite's happening. AI is going to consolidate wealth into silos, right? So if there aren't governance...
Well, okay, let me interrupt. Even without AI, they have been consolidating, right? So,
right.
So this is just the economic force that...
It's capitalism.
Exactly.
Yeah,
That's
capitalism.
the word, the C word, right?
So let me restate that. like AI is going to do it at such a rate that humans are going to lose their minds.
Yes.
And this is just one of many sort of economic pressures right now that are summing up to this consolidation. So we have to create governance structures inside of corporations that do not do that, that disperse wealth not to just the shareholder class, who ultimately are, at least the top 5% of wealth holders I'm making that number up, but like they are the top tier wealth holders already, right? Like poor people don't own stock. And if they do, it's in such a limited fashion that it's not going to have a real economic outcome, change in their fortunes, right? So we need to change the way we do corporate governance structures. And that's what we tried to do with Work Hard Pittsburgh, right? Like we tried to demonstrate that you could participate in this high growth economy and have an equitable, community-focused way to disperse wealth down through the people that you're responsible to.
Okay. So from the various stages of Work Hard Pittsburgh, I remember that you started as a for-profit?
We were always a for-profit.
Always for-profit?
Everything we did was for-profit because that was
So it was never a non-profit?
Never. That was the crux of what we were trying to solve, is that wealth is consolidating. What's the alternative system?
Okay. So, and then you turn into co-op, but co-op is still for-profit?
Still a for-profit.
Okay. All right. So why not non-profit?
Well, because that wasn't what we were trying to demonstrate, right? We were trying to demonstrate that there were different ways to do business that could embrace progressive values and still make money.
Okay.
And so nonprofits don't make money, right? And
I second that.
Except UPMC, right? Like most nonprofits don't know how to make money, right?
Yes.
Like if you told them to make money, we do tell them to make money. They just aren't equipped to do that. For a variety of reasons. I mean, that's a whole other kind of line of discussion. Yeah. So, we actively resisted that, right? Like, we never thought it the right thing to do to become a nonprofit. Now, had some large philanthropic organization in town said, hey, listen, we're going to give you this investment, become a nonprofit, we would have, I'm sure, because we thought the work was ultimately, especially as you got into the later years, the value we were bringing at a community level was very useful to people, and people sought it and found, again, the word meaning in it. But yeah, everything we did was a for-profit. We used New Sun Rising as a fiscal sponsor and a partner to give us sort of non-profit governance oversight, but we were never a 501c3.
Okay, all right. So not even non-profit structured underneath the for-profit.
Nope.
What's the mechanism? No. Okay.
Nope. There were a couple LLCs. I mean, at its peak, there were probably 5 different LLCs, real estate holding LLCs. The agency was actually a corporation, and we had to be that because we had so many shareholders on the cap table. So, like, the law required us not to just be an LLC. Mm-hmm. And the co-op would have actually had to have switched from an LLC at some point to a corporation too, had it continued to grow.
Okay.
Because there's a limit how many people you can have on your cap table as an LLC.
Okay. All right. So you mentioned about Leon's Caribbean. I think when we were at the Launch Hilltop, and then also several events. After that, NSR and Work Hard Pittsburgh bought food from them, right? From Leon's Caribbean, right?
Yeah, I'm sure we catered with Leon many times.
Many times, which is a feature, or which is something that I think it's great.
Yeah.
And I think that is the foundations of our tangible way to collaborate.
Yeah.
Right? I think just like the Work Hard Pittsburgh, or WH Digital, right? You have a tool, you have a pool of talents where you can share or give each other's business.
Yeah.
But with that idea, with that mindset, was it successful?
Yeah, I mean, I think on paper it was very successful, right? Like, so I have the numbers here.
Yeah.
Luckily pulled up. So I don't have numbers after 2020 because we lost all our staff when we stopped getting funding, right? But as of 2020, we did $6.3 million of wages from job placements. So the ecosystem had created $6.3 million of salaries for people living in Pittsburgh. About 65% of those, give or take a couple percent, were underrepresented. Oh, sorry. That was just the 2020 wage placement. That was just 1 year of wage generation. From 2017 to 2019, we generated about $7.9 million of salaries for people, mostly going into software development, but doing some project management and other things too. In that same time, we did about $1.3 million of 1099 contracts. Photographers, graphic designers, audio engineers, just late production assistants, the whole sort of gamut of creative arts. And then we donated about $2.1 million of services to nonprofits. So in that sort of 4-year window, give or take again, we generated about $17.7 million of wages and income for people living in the region. And about half of that, so give or take, 6 or 7 million of it went to Black people, Latinos, LGBT community members, people with disabilities, formerly incarcerated people. We had a lot of like ex-cons. Work Hard attracted ex-cons. I don't know why. We got a lot of them. So, you know, I think it was objectively, measurably very successful. Now, to counter that, right, there was a total of $1.5 million of grant investment and $800,000 of loans made by philanthropic organizations. So that's that $2.3 million number of total investment by philanthropy. So that's a 7.5x return on their investment. So for every dollar they put in as philanthropy, we generated $7.5 of wages. Like wages. That's not even counting like the peripheral effects of like community building or educating people or opening up a network where like cross business happened. Like a lot of our members would like do business with each other. We never had the opportunity to measure that because it was just such a hard thing to like pin down, right? It's hard to like get that quantified. So yeah, I mean, I'm very proud of like that decade of work, and also, you know, very disappointed that it never got to like scale and be what I think would have been like a national proof of concept that could have ultimately informed other markets.
I remember that you were planning to expand, right? But then COVID hit.
COVID hit, and yeah.
Right. So I remember that you had the new building being.
Yeah,
right?
we had one building that we owned. It was a 10,000 square foot warehouse that we had purchased. That was going to be the future home. You know, house like our training facilities and space for businesses. And then New Sun Rising owned the other building that we occupied on East Warrington Avenue. We had like a 99-year lease with them. That was obviously like very advantageous. It was to help us continue to grow. But ultimately, when you buy expensive property, you have to have a lot of money to rehab it and maintain it and hold it. And COVID, you know, not just fragmented our community culturally, but it also did damage to our actual earned income. You know, so at the end, about 30% of our operating budget came from philanthropy. The other 70% came from work, from doing digital services for, you know, nonprofits and small businesses and building apps and all sorts of things that, you know, generated income that could allow us to pay the few salaries for the W-2s that we had that did the administrative work of Work Hard Pittsburgh. And what COVID also did is it slowed down the hiring cycles for Academy Pittsburgh graduates. So in that year, a lot of tech companies were doing hiring freezes because they were all remote and they weren't in the offices. Google did it, everybody did it, right? And so we weren't getting the income from the ISAs, the income share agreements from Academy grads either. So sort of a double whammy. So we went from having about roughly 700 grand of earned income that we were paying salaries with to maybe 300 grand that year. And the math stopped working. Like we couldn't operate with a $300,000 shortfall. Like we couldn't pay our bills. We couldn't pay for the buildings. We couldn't, you know, pay this people that were doing the work that were still, what would you call it? Still obligated under grant cycles from previous years. And that was, you know, the reason why we shut down ultimately. Like I couldn't personally float that cash.
And the foundations didn't want to help. I mean, or some other, that COVID loan.
we got that right, but so RK Mellon stepped up with COVID investment. There was a special RK Mellon program. So I don't remember what year. I'd have to go back and really think about this. COVID was 2019 it start. What year did COVID start?
2020.
2020. So that must have been 2020. RK Mellon stepped up with one of their COVID emergency funds. And that got us to 2021, but we're still $300,000 short, right? To continue in 2021 because the revenue on our earned income side hadn't recovered yet. And it probably, looking back on it, probably wouldn't have recovered till late 2022, just because that's what was happening economically, like globally.
Uncertainty, right? People didn't know when it's going to end, right?
Yeah. We reached out in 2021 to everybody and said, like, everybody being like all of the philanthropic partners that had in the past supported us. And we said, like, this is the reality of it. Like, I can't do this anymore. I can't do this with just me, right? I can't do this without a staff. I can't float this personally anymore. Like, I can't put more money into, like, because I have ungodly amounts of money invested into Work Hard Pittsburgh.
Not Bitcoin?
No Bitcoin. And one of them stepped up with a normal amount, I'd say, a normal amount, which I think is too small, but an amount that we were used to. But the shortfall was too big. If there wasn't going to be a second one stepping up to like sort of match that amount, it was just too tough. And at that point, and this might have been a strategic mistake, depending on how you frame it, I guess. I was pushing for a 3-year commitment because we keep getting in these like 1-year grant cycles that never allowed us to like do the thing we knew we needed to do to shift the percentage to more earned income, have the staff on hand to like really get over some of the fragmented, poorly conceived ideas that were the basis of the organizational structure and the administrative systems and processes. And like, we had no HR, so to speak of. We were always felt like we were in peril because we were never doing things to the letter of like what you would expect a normal business to do, right? Because we never had the resources to do that stuff. We never had healthcare for our employees, all that sort of thing. And in that ask, that looking back on was probably too aggressive of an ask. I think that was it. I think a lot of people were just like, what's this? What's going on here? A lot of the philanthropic partners were just like, what's going on here? This is a for-profit. We're not going to make these kind of investments in a for-profit. We're not going to make these kind of commitments to a for-profit. And you'd have to ask them why that is the case, because again, I think that the evidence is there that we were running really successful programming. So there's other reasons why we're not eligible for funding. And you see now, and I'm not, how do I say this without coming across as ornery? I don't want to come across as ornery in this particular point. You see now our model being replicated in the Pop District under a large public nonprofit. And I think that's good. I'm okay with that. I think it's great. I think that's demonstrates that aspects of what we did have at least provided some lessons to the leadership here in town and has a chance now to continue. And 2 of our staff people have been hired over there, which is, awesome. And I'm really happy that those folks, have that opportunity now to continue the work.
Now that reminds me, are you talking about the Academy PGH and Brookline?
Well, Academy Pittsburgh still is operating.
Okay.
Our partner in that bought out Work Hard Pittsburgh. And as far as I know, there's still 2 sessions of Academy Pittsburgh training people to be entry-level software developers happening in Brookline. But the Warhol partnered with us to take the digital marketing boot camp, which was something we launched in the middle of the pandemic, and continue that boot camp programming. So that is an educational program that is to create a generation of digital marketing professionals here in town, which if you know the tech startup scene and if you know people that do hiring in Pittsburgh, that's a real pain point. Like Pittsburgh has a fair amount of software engineers, a fair amount of project managers, but Pittsburgh doesn't have elite marketing talent. Pittsburgh doesn't even have junior marketing talent. It's a real gap in our capacity here, and it really hinders the growth of a lot of small for-profits and startups and things like that.
Why do you think that's the case?
Why don't we have those?
Yeah.
Because they all live in LA and New York, where the business is. Right, right. And Pittsburgh. I don't know. Pittsburgh's pro-growth, is that the right word? Pittsburgh's conservative historically has been conservative in the way that it invests its marketing dollars, but now it can't be because the world's changed so much. You have to have a.
Probably they think that it's Pittsburgh, it's a small city, big town mentality that everybody knows each other. There's no marketing required. Everybody can just, it's your friend of friends, so you buy it from them.
Yeah, I mean, if you're selling to the guy down the street, but if you want to sell to the guy in Korea, then
oh no, yeah.
If you're a business that wants to do more business than just outside of Allegheny County, then you need to have trained marketing professionals. So anyway, that program went to the Warhol, and the Pop District. That's the name of that arm of the Warhol, has its own creative agency that is going to sub out graduates of that program and put them to work, pay them, generate wealth for generate income for the program, so there's sustainability. So there's a real opportunity there under that nonprofit to see sort of this, at least general template for how we organize things to go forward. I'm bummed that it's not a for-profit. I guess there is that for-profit arm. So maybe what I'm bummed about is that there's no opportunity for sort of that cooperative democratic governance, that it's going to be governed in that hierarchical nonprofit structure. Yeah.
Thank you for your honesty. It's rare that people say, "Oh, I'm bummed."
Yeah. I mean, I've gotten a horse in this at this point, right? Like, I'm not soliciting grants, so like.
But something that I found, I don't know, like I said, that started with, my background is in a for-profit, and then just like a sole proprietor, as a photographer, and then just got into this non-profit thing. When there's a good idea being done by somebody else, other people tend not to collaborate with them.
Yeah.
Not, or in the for-profit world, let's do M&A, right? Let's do merchant acquisition, right? Let's just absorb that talent as opposed to build something up.
Yeah.
Right? Let's merge. Or probably, of course, the bigger corporation would have that as a sub, as a department, but, it's the fastest way. I don't want to say easiest way, but it's the fastest way to absorb talent and absorb capability, and to make the bigger organization bigger and more capable, right? I see that very rarely happening here.
Yeah.
And actually, I see that even like in the journalism, right? People have their own niche, and when they see that niche is a good idea, then the bigger organization, let's do that also. Right, as opposed to just, hey, these guys are doing great. Can we collaborate?
Oh,
Can
for sure.
Or even when they collaborate, they're like, oh, let's create something new, a new entity.
Right.
So, I mean, it's like,
well,
why the heck is that?
Yeah,
right?
I mean, that's just scarcity mindset, right? Like that's not abundance thinking.
Yeah, or I think I look at your website here too. When you mention about this, right? For not amplifying egos, right? Yeah. It's amplifying ideas, and I see that even in a nonprofit, egos are high out there.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, to the Warhol's credit, based on like what we were politically able to do, because we had our own organizational issues as far as like just how things were organized, like who owned what LLC, that prevented the Warhol, I think, from that and other factors, prevented the Warhol from being able to absorb us wholly. But to the Warhol's credit and the Pop District's credit, they took what they could. Like I said, they took two of our leaders from the community, they gave them jobs, they leaned on that expertise to kind of relaunch this programming. They paid for IP from Work Hard Pittsburgh that, saved them time and energy from reproducing it, but also gave us an opportunity to get out of some of the copious amount of debt that we had, or still have. So, like,
That's great.
yeah, I mean, I think you're right. I think consolidation is definitely in order, right? I think part of what philanthropy might be able to do that would be really useful for the region is not just like killing some of these small projects, but like you said, consolidating them into something more meaningful and more effective.
Right. And I think it's one of the top strategies in for-profit is to seek out all this, smaller fishes to buy.
Yeah.
Right. I mean, I know that a lot of startups in the Silicon Valley, that their goal is not to hit big or to be in a stock market, but to be purchased.
Yeah.
It's their goal.
Yeah,
right.
Totally. But again, like, philanthropy would have to say out loud what they want to do, and I don't think I've ever seen them do that. I mean, sure, they put it in the website that this is our goals and stuff, but they never like sit down in a room and have a personal relationship with, say, the 4 executive directors and say, listen, here we are, all 5 of us in this room, let's negotiate effectiveness.
I think for that last part, I think they may have that meeting with their 4 favorite executive directors that have been getting, general operating support with the 3 or 5 years commitment, right?
Yeah.
But not to others, right?
Yeah.
So that's the that's the hard part. Right?
If that's outcome driven, I'd be all right with it, but I suspect it's political. So much of business, as you probably know, is who you know and how your relationship with them.
Yeah.
And that extends into philanthropy, support of nonprofits.
Right.
But that's not how it should be.
Yes. Amplifying ideas, not egos. So listen up, people.
And measure. Measure as you go, and report what you measure, and open yourself to criticism. And if philanthropy could do those things in the next 10 years, I'm convinced Pittsburgh would be better.
I believe that too.
Yeah.
The humanities would be better. Right?
Yeah.
So what do you do now?
I had a baby.
All right. How old?
She's 10 months old now. So that has interrupted, I would say.
First one, right?
First one, only one, because I'm old. That has interrupted the next thing, I would say, like the progress to the next thing. Me and a few former Work Hard Pittsburgh members, some were just 1099s, have relaunched a new service called Tandem. And it operates under the premise that you shouldn't be managing your technology infrastructure anymore. That if you're a small business, small to medium-sized nonprofit, that it is not cost-effective for you to be the staff person who deploys, manages, organizes, and maintains your technology. Especially with the rapid change of technology and the now inclusion of these new AI systems, it's not going to make sense for a 5-person nonprofit to try to hire an employee to understand, leverage, and maximize the value of that stuff. And we've seen this historically over the decade of running the old agency. Companies, nonprofits, purchasing software, then not deploying it and not using it. CRMs are a great example of that. Can't tell you how many Salesforce CRM instances that we would go into and just be unused. They're paying hundreds of dollars, if not thousands of dollars a month to Salesforce to have that. And because they have no staff, there's no amount of training that's going to make them competent because they have no time to go and work and leverage that resource. We believe that there's a shift in the market as such that you'll be able to pay professionals to maintain these resources, and there'll be an ROI for you in doing that.
Yeah. So how involved are you with this Tandem?
Well, I run it. So I run it on a part-time basis right now. Probably a dozen clients that we are doing work for.
So how part-time is part-time? Because it's very... Would you say that you're a full-time dad and part-time Tandem?
No, my grandma got the kiddo till about 1.
Okay.
So from like 6 a.m. to 1, I run Tandem.
Okay.
And then I do daddy duties in the afternoon. And then obviously pick up whatever slack needs to be picked up on the weekend. So it'll be the full-time gig, I think, for the foreseeable future. I have a couple other projects that are nonprofit-y in nature that I'd like to see launch, but I just don't have the time for them right now. No matter how exciting they are to me, I just can't carve out the days or the hours in the day to like get them moving forward.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And you mentioned AI
I'm
several
obsessed with
times in this conversation.
Yeah.
And as a dad of a 10-month-old child, and AI is certainly coming and fast.
Too fast.
So how do you see education that we see right now? And you're also used to be a teacher, right?
Yeah, for 13 years I was a high school chemistry teacher.
Oh, wow. So you have the viewpoint as from a teacher, now you have a viewpoint of a dad, and then as a techie who are well versed in
It's horrifying. I mean, cultural and social norms are going to be eradicated at a rate that unprecedented in human history. Like the idea that you're going to go to a physical building and be publicly educated is a tenuous concept at this point, and that's sad because public education is the source of a lot of the good things in our culture. It's that unifying experience that gives us cohesion as a society, and I just don't know that it's going to be relevant. I don't know that the jobs of the future, which aren't going to be skill-based, in my opinion, because your human level of intelligence is never going to be able to compete with the executables on a skill with machine intelligence.
The speed, the fast of knowledge. And,
And so what does that leave humans with?
Yes.
I mean, have you played with Midjourney yet?
Oh, that's scary, man. And that reminds me of many, I don't know, decades ago when photographers were like making fun of digital cameras.
Yeah.
Like, oh, this piece of shit, you can't, it's like JPEG, what the heck? Right here, film, right?
Yeah.
So let's see.
Yeah. So what's scary about Midjourney is that it devalues the one thing humans can do. A thing that only humans used to be able to do.
Yeah.
Artistically create and render something for consumption.
Yeah.
That's a human experience. That's a conversation that used to only be able to happen between two humans.
Right.
And now we're taking that off the table as a skill that, I don't know, millions of people found economic value in, and more importantly, cultural cohesion through. Art.
Yeah.
And the act of making art and the act of viewing art
yeah.
is what creates culture and society.
Right.
We used to all go to the movies and talk about Pulp Fiction or pick the movie in the 90s that was the cultural phenomenon. That's what gave us our cultural identity and kept us from, I think, in large degree, beating each other up in the streets, you know what I mean? Or having some sort of like physical conflict with each other.
Yeah.
There was always those translatable human experiences to come back to and ground us in connection. But now we're not going to have that. Like, what's the value of art when you just, in 8 seconds, can generate a year's worth of artistic effort from a human?
Right.
It's shocking. And well, that's not true. People are talking about it, but the people that are talking about it are the people that are creating it, and they're doing it without the informed consent of 99.999% of the rest of the world.
Yes.
And that's horrible.
But that's how the technology progresses. That's how they been doing things, right? When they created computers. Hey, you're going to, all those typewriters.
Yeah.
Those people who, I remember a picture in my head. It's like a room full of, admin folks typing. Like hundreds of them, right? At the same time. It's like a beautiful noise, in my opinion. But but they don't have them anymore, and people's like, how can I expedite these things?
Yeah.
So you don't need a whiteout. I know. I'm dating myself, right? So doing the whiteout, the paper, and then you match it, and then you click it.
Oh, I remember, Will. Son, I'm old. I remember these things.
All right. So that's how technology. I mean, I guess I can blame the effectiveness and efficient mindset. And I
The-
honestly, when I was in a for-profit, I'm partly to blame. I mean,
Yeah.
that's how I did. If I could cut corner, I cut corners. If there's something that I can eliminate, I will eliminate.
Yeah.
But because but it's transparent, because that's the goal.
Yeah.
It's a something that that we see. I mean, again, I don't want to beat down the dead horse, but if it's not transparent, you don't know where they're going, and I think creates more frustration. But if we do know already in transparently what this person is going to do, where
Yeah.
they're going, and you can make changes, you can adapt, right? Oh, if I know that this position of this job or whatever it is going to get cut, let's time to make change.
Yeah.
Either you fight it, you fight or flight, right? I guess you have to change. Let's stop AI, right? Those are, a lot of people have that reactions, but some people say, okay, AI is coming. let's be a hairdressers. It can be replaced by AI. I mean, until they come up with the robots that can
Yeah.
can shape your hair, right? But so do things that
Yeah. I mean,
only
in the,
people
in the
can do.
next 10, 20 years, things that organizations or businesses that curate human experience are going to remain successful. But unlike the typewriter, what's coming is technology that obliterates human experience. You're not going to make art anymore. People aren't going to make art anymore. People aren't going to make music anymore. Like, we're eliminating whole aspects of human experience that people used to find value in. We're eliminating completely the economic value of that. And that's going to result in horrible, horrible consequences.
Yeah. So going back to my original question, that how do you see your child, the 10-month-old child, in this future related to the education that she's going to be getting in 4 years?
Living like a Quaker on a farm, practicing some sort of Luddite religion, and wearing an EM cage on her head. Yeah, dude, I don't know, man. I'm super pessimistic about all this. Like, there's going to be wealthy people that are going to live luxurious lifestyles, no doubt. Like, there's going to be more wealth in the world, and for some period of time, humans are going to get to experience that. But I ultimately don't think that is valuable. Like, I ultimately, looking back on my own experience of what I think is the important part of being a human, it's not basking in luxury. It's not enjoying, it's not the practice of living in finery, for lack of a better word. It's the work that goes into magnifying human experience. It's that lived experience. It's that thing that you share with other humans that collectively you did to create value, whether that's Work Hard Pittsburgh, or the work you did for a client, or your family vacation. Like, that's really where the meaning is in this weird consciousness existence that we get to dabble in. And AI is not going to amplify that, in my opinion. AI is going to amplify the other stuff, the material stuff, make that more readily available, make materialism more executable for more people. But that's not making better people.
Yeah.
That removing that incentive to participate with other humans to craft and curate experience, like, that's a bad thing. And we need to, like, actively work and try to save human experience.
Yeah.
Like, that's the weird bit.
And I think as a child growing up, the experience of going to school,
Yeah.
interact with other kids,
Yeah.
whether nice kids or bullies,
Yeah.
that's part of the
That's it.
experience that makes a person.
Yeah. It gives you a sense of reward. Even when, like, you can't have happiness without struggle.
Yes.
I'm convinced of that.
Yes. You can't be a good guy unless there's a bad guy.
Yeah. Yeah, for sure. For sure. Yeah. And you can't be the hero of your own story if there's no challenge to overcome. And I'm sure there are going to be huge challenges for very poor people in the future. But there's going to be a class of people that there aren't challenges for, and they're going to be less ethical because of it. I don't know, this may be too rambly, too philosophical.
It's okay. I think it's good. I mean, I have a child, and it's in the high school, right? But I'm also thinking about it.
Hmm.
That yeah, I mean, 10 years seems to be a long time, but in 10 years,
That's
it's
nothing.
yeah, the AI is exponentially,
Yep.
you know,
Yep.
faster and faster in development, right? So
Yeah.
in 10 years could be, I don't know, a lot of things can be
A
obsolete.
lot of jobs are
So
going to go away.
yeah, so I could not see myself, I don't know, if I were in your position having a 10 months old,
Yeah.
that scares the shit out of me,
Yeah, it's scary.
right? And also, and how can, so I mean, you mentioned about going to school, had this influence of being other people, makes you a person, but the content of the education itself is worrisome,
There's nothing to teach.
right?
Yeah.
Yeah. So, but that requires, yeah. So not,
Like,
I mean,
why are you
how,
going to teach a kid how to program? Like, they're not going to need to program anymore.
right? Just ask,
Like,
right?
yeah, I mean,
So at
other
least
than
I guess the it's like how to synthesize a question. Well, you don't even have to do that. You just put keywords, right?
yeah,
I like yeah, Shakespeare, whatever.
yeah. I mean, that's not even going to be a thing. Like why learn to do math when you can just ask the machine that knows natural language to do the math for you? And if you don't know how to communicate the math you're trying to do, that machine's going to be smart enough to figure it out with you eventually. Maybe not now, but 10 years from now, it's most likely. Like we're, we're creating with general AI at scale, if it is realized how the futurists imagine it, we're creating a situation where there's no peril. There's like no intellectual peril for a person. There's no physical peril for a person. I don't think that's what it means to be a human. Yeah. So humans are obsolete. I mean, humans, like if you become like, I don't know. It's like it's scary. I don't know, dude. I don't know like what elementary school kids need to learn to be relevant 18 years from now.
I think the interpersonal skills is something that, in addition to dealing with machines, right? So yeah. I guess you really have to, again, going out into troubleshooting mode, you have a problem and then you just break them down to pieces, right?
Yeah.
What makes a human, right? And our usefulness, right? And then given the AI now is it's a growing thing and it's something a must-have for people to have the skills to control it or to get something out of it for our needs. It's something that we need to educate. But of course, there's always a plan B. Say that we have I don't know, God forbid, apocalypse.
Yeah.
No power.
Yeah.
Right? So everything has to be done manually, right? So
yeah.
I mean, people have to think about that too.
Yeah.
Right? But probably you don't, if that happens, people are not necessarily going to do regression analysis, right? Like in the jungle with a video candle. Let's do this.
Abacus of shells.
Right. Some people only do like, okay, let's hunt for food, right? I mean, so they're like, So I think education by itself has to be.
Well, the problem with public education is the problem of philanthropy to a large degree is that it's largely run by a lot of really old people, and I barely have a grasp of it. I don't think they grasp how fast things are going to change, and how that rapid change is going to make what they do something that the rest of society devalues.
Yeah.
And you already see it with the high school kids. Like high school kids get their education on YouTube and TikTok and stuff like that. And while I'm sure there's book learning still happening, like whatever a young adult's interest is truly in, like they can get that college level education now online just through the existing content that is out there. Like, 5 years ago, we were telling kids not to go to school for videography at Work Hard Pittsburgh because why would you pay for that? Like everything you need to know can be learned in 6 months.
Yeah.
And as long as you have a professional network to get feedback and have professional growth,
right?
Like that's really what you need. You need your professional network and these basic skills, and then the rest of it you'll just pick up.
Interpersonal skills with other human.
Yeah.
I think that network.
Client management, key, right? All that stuff. Yeah.
Yeah, but which just reminds me that.
But colleges don't teach client management. Colleges don't teach. At least when I was there, maybe it's changed. Like interpersonal skills.
Yeah. So I guess that also creates another problem, right? I mean, people who have network and people who don't,
Oh yeah.
right? And I know we're touching about, social economic problems, social justice, that, in Pittsburgh, there are certain class who could go anywhere.
Yeah.
But there are certain classes that, you
Yeah.
have to work hard to get into, right? So
Oh,
that,
you can't even get into them.
right.
Yeah, they're locked
Right,
out. You're
right.
locked out.
So yeah, so we have problems, but are you looking forward to the future?
No.
You mentioned human is obsolete.
Yeah, I mean, I'm fundamentally a humanist, and I don't see how humans are relevant in 100 years.
Yes, I think what we need to do is lay out the problem, state it, and break them to pieces.
The problem is capitalism. Well, the problem is that people have this innate desire to accumulate more resources beyond what they need.
Yeah.
And so rather than deploying artificial intelligence in a way that's going to benefit the most amount of people and create the most sort of like collective happiness,
Yeah.
you'll see people using AI to consolidate their power and their wealth to the detriment of anyone. It doesn't even matter who.
Yeah.
Everyone, anyone.
Do you think it's going to happen?
Yeah, absolutely. It's inevitable. I don't see a way out of this sort of like, it's like just a feedback loop.
Yeah.
There's no way to break the feedback loop. The incentives are all wrong. Like, go
But
ahead.
what about the capitalism? Do you think that we can get rid of it?
No.
Right.
No, not at all. I don't know why. It just needs. There's nothing fundamentally wrong with capitalism. It just needs regulated in such a way that it's honest, and that we don't have honest capitalism, right? But again, like even capitalism is putting the wrong incentives in the hands of people that are going to have overwhelming technology that is essentially a black box to them and completely invisible to the rest of the world. You can call it science fiction if you like, but somewhere in Google right now are quantum computers that may or may not be running all sorts of algorithms or connected to other systems that have some form of rudimentary general intelligence that are going to have shocking capacity to see the patterns thousands of times better than humans can see them.
Yeah.
And what you do with that information and how you deploy that information is going to redefine what it means to be human. Do you apply that to genomic sequencing and start messing with the very fabric of what it means to be a human on a genetic level? Do you just use it to rig every election for the rest of eternity through information and disinformation campaigns fed into these little black mirrors that we carry around? Like all that stuff is going to happen, and there's nobody equipped to be the counterbalance to that. The federal government can't counterbalance it. Philanthropy certainly isn't going to counterbalance it. The unions aren't in a position economically or societally to counterbalance it. There's nobody to like observe, critique, dissect, or slow the progress that is about to be made.
Right.
And so you really then only hope is that some moral people at the top of that pyramid of consolidated wealth and power still see the value in base human experience, the experience of the proletariat, and allow it to continue in some form.
Yeah. So yeah, that's my hope too, that there are people, there are moral people who are willing to honestly sacrifice themselves.
Yeah.
Right? There's a lot to ask, because capitalism is making people richer, right? But now just stay rich. You don't have to be richer, right? Just that much. You just sacrifice. It's okay to have 50 billion, but not 51, right? So maintain your 50 billion, right? So that's the sacrifice that we want, right? I mean, if that they can do,
Yeah.
I think we have a hope. But unless if they just want to expand, we want to be the first foundation who has a $2 billion in asset. If as soon as they reach that, as soon as they say that, there's no hope.
Yeah, the problem is everybody's the hero of their own story. Look, I just did it to you on this podcast for an hour and 45 minutes. I told you my hero story, right?
Yes.
So whomever is sitting at the top of that in moral judgment is the hero of their own story. And whatever morality they have, they're going to wield with the belief that they are doing it virtuously.
Yes.
But that morality may affect 1 billion people. You know what I mean? Like, it may devalue 1 billion people in a non-purposeful way. It may just accidentally result in the elimination of whole classes or countries or borders, or it's just unimaginable the rapid change that's going to happen in the next 100 years.
Yeah, everybody wants to be a better person, whatever that is defined. But just be mindful that when there's better, and somebody's going to get pushed down. So make sure that you don't push down a lot and too many.
Yeah, you can't act without consequences.
Right. You have to be just, the word that people are calling it right now, mindful, right? Mindful in what you do.
Yeah.
Mindful that, again, when you step on the ladder, you have to step on something, and most likely it's going to be a person, right?
Absolutely.
And
I mean, there are Work Hard Pittsburgh members who feel like they've been stepped on in this wind down. There's always going to be that. Like, there's always going to be a consequence for someone, intended or not, that is detrimental. And it just now, what's going to happen next is the scale of that is going to be profound. And then couple that with climate change and
that climate change thing.
Climate change. Got Bill Gates talking about blocking the sun.
Vaccine. The malaria net. I don't know. All right,
crazy times, man.
Crazy times. All right, it's been great talking to you.
Yeah, I appreciate the opportunity to spew.
I enjoy your honesty, your transparency, your openness.
Thanks.
And I like to have more people like Josh.
Yeah, thanks for doing this. Like I said, it's important that we start having more conversations and preserve that human experience.
Yes, because I think the last frontier is
still up there.
People's brain,
Yeah.
right? So all this. All right, thank you, sir.
Thank
all
you,
right,
brother.
it's a wrap.